Hello, welcome to the Sunday Shot. I am Dave Milner, editor of The Shot, and today without the adult supervision of Joe Dyer, who is taking an extremely well-deserved holiday in China right now, and frankly, I'm scared for the rest of us. I don't know what's going to happen, but we do have an excellent panel to hang out with and digest what we're all living through in this madness. Mr. Bogan Intelligentsia, Joel Jenkins, welcome back to the shot.
Thank you very much for having me back, Dave. It was really interesting the other week on Friday, bumping into you down at the docks like Marlon Brando on the waterfront there. We had where we attended a bit of a protest there, but I suppose we could speak about that a bit later.
We
But
did.
thanks for having me.
We should get to that. Marlon Brando vibes, absolutely. Fleshing out the panel. This is a bit of a thrill for our viewers who have been reading her work for years now. Please welcome Miss Ronni Salt.
Hello, everybody. Hi.
Hey, Ronni. Nice to see your hands.
Hey, Ronni.
Puppetry. Hi, Joel. Hi, everyone.
And fleshing out the panel, everyone's favourite, extremely numerate graph guy from the Australia Institute, Mr. Greg Jericho. Pleasure to have you, please.
Really good to be here, Dave. And Ronni and Joel, great to be on the panel with you.
G'day, Greg.
Greg.
I think we have to start with the news out of Palestine and Gaza and the emergence of what is being presented as peace, but really we are seeing a continuation of the occupation. I think there's no ifs or buts about that. Joel, what's your read on what's been happening the last few days?
Look, it's been a pretty rough couple of days, I think, for the people of Gaza at the end of the day, and I just think I wanted to relay a message that I received from someone who actually was born and raised in Gaza, who was essentially saying that people are pretty relieved at the end of the day, even though it's like a very fragile and vague ceasefire agreement. That at the moment, that hopefully just something can come out of it. That potentially with the global pressure and the pressure on Trump, that things might be different this time. But that said, Israel, I heard quoted somewhere, has a PhD in breaking ceasefires, and we're going to see potentially some more problems in that space as Israel refuses to cede ground. Hamas is still present in the Gaza Strip, and at any point it seems like Israel seems to be able to break a ceasefire under the pretense of disarming or eradicating Hamas. So we'll see where that leads.
There is a very clear historical precedent of these ceasefires being breached and Israeli forces. The Onion headline, I think, was pretty classic before. Israel has agreed to start killing Palestinians on a less frequent basis. And it's the cynical read, but it is also the historical pattern. At the same time, Joel, we should acknowledge that last night we were seeing footage out of Gaza of children dancing and singing, which is very different to the types of videos we've been seeing children being mutilated for the last 2 years. There is something to cling on to.
Yes, but that was contrasting with bombing that was happening and, is still continuing. I think there's a few hours left until that parliamentary decree via Israel sort of kicks in. So, kind of those contrasting scenes. We can only hope that after the dancing is enough time for some people to sort of breathe a bit of air. And then from there, hopefully for some of the international community to come in and start unpacking what's under the rubble of Gaza, really, and hopefully with that attention and that presence, the situation could change there.
We hope so. We're also seeing the Samud flotilla. I'm going to call them heroes. They've put their bodies on the line for humanity, and we are seeing them coming home. We haven't seen much from the Prime Minister or Penny Wong's department about the flotilla heroes. Greg, what is your read on the political situation that the Australian government finds itself in right now?
Look, it's been a weird week in that if you've been watching Parliament, which unfortunately I do, it's a complete, fantasy world that they're living in, because the Liberal Party have spent most of this week talking about ISIS brides, because that apparently is something that we care about. In fact, not even all the Liberal Party cares about it. Susan Lee doesn't care about it. She doesn't want to do it, but she was forced to at least have a few of the questions in there to placate the Andrew Hasty wing. No real sort of talk about Gaza, except in the sense of let's give praise to Donald Trump for delivering peace, at least peace for a day. It's and within that, I think the only other sort of political aspect in which we might get to is the sense of using October 7 as a big memorial. And yet when you listen to Susan Lee and Anthony Albanese, it was all about October 7 and very little, if anything, certainly nothing from Susan Lee about the destruction of Gaza that came afterwards, and definitely no mention of genocide. So, the fantasy or fractured world that the politicians are living in continues. And I think you can see why everyone around the world is praising Donald Trump for this. Is one, because they know Donald Trump doesn't care about anything unless he's getting praise for it, and they're kind of thinking, well, if this is what we have to do to stop the killing, then that's, to be honest, I don't give a damn if Donald Trump gets praise for it. If Gazan people are no longer being slaughtered, that's a good thing. The problem is, as we all know, this plan that Trump and Tony Blair have come up with doesn't really give much of a voice for Palestinians. There was some good things to get hostages transferred on both sides, but the next steps are pretty, the other tough ones. And unless you're going to start getting Jordan and Syria and Saudi Arabia and Egypt and others involved in the agreement as well, nothing's much is going to happen. And also the classic, of course, is Trump loves a quick win, loves to be able to make an announcement and say it's all been solved. The problem with this one is you'd actually have to stick around and do something. And I think that might be why you're seeing a lot of world leaders sort of really trying to link Trump with it to hopefully force him to actually care about this in the long term. But, no killing is good. But unfortunately, we do know Israel has some rather shitty form on this.
That's a really good point, Greg, about world leaders, I guess, trying to fluff up Trump so he associates nice dopamine-like feelings with bringing peace to Gaza. And, a man that sycophantic and desperate to be praised, it's not really a bad strategy. What we are going to see, I think, which is unequivocal, is the information war about Israel is going to ramp up to grotesque degrees. We have Zionist billionaires just about to purchase TikTok. We have seen reports that they are paying high-profile influencers up to $7,000 for a single Instagram post pro-Israel. And Netanyahu himself has confessed to this. We're also going to continue seeing mainstream press do the work of this oppressive organization. And we do need to talk about the National Press Club of Australia that has cancelled Chris Hedges, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist that was set to give a speech on the portrayal of Palestinian journalists by Western journalists to a room full of people that have betrayed Palestinian journalists. Naturally, the NPC has cancelled this, and there's a stoush going on. We won't get into the details too much because the good news is I will be chatting with Chris, and that will be on the Sunday Shot next week, and we're going to go hard. Ronni, you had a little look at the types of people that sponsor the National Press Club I saw this week.
Yes, I was quite astonished, actually. I was astonished and I was not astonished. Of course, none of these people that are giving money to the National Press Club would have in any way influenced their decision. Of course not. But they have Raytheon, which is the second largest, arms dealer in the world, arms manufacturer and dealer in the world, who are one of the major suppliers to the Israeli Defence Forces. They have British Aerospace Engineering, and they have Thales. All three of those are arms manufacturers and suppliers. They sponsor the national organisation that is a platform for Australia's journalists. Now, apart from anything else, the Chris Hedges issue aside, what on earth is happening there that they're accepting that sort of sponsorship money? And how does it impact upon the decisions that they make? There doesn't need to be any outside pressure, as the press club claimed in their media release. There was no outside pressure. There doesn't have to be. It's innate. So I've never looked at their sponsors before. I mean, they have lots of other, salubrious sponsors like Westpac, etc., but I'm absolutely shocked that arms dealers and manufacturers are sponsoring an organisation of journalists. Where does that leave them?
Well, I mean, since Turnbull essentially announced Australia's ambitions to be a top 10 weapons manufacturer, the thing has really flown off the scales. And, the NPC is kind of like the peak of the madness, I think. But, at the think tanks like ASPI, within the media landscape, private corporate sponsorships and partnerships with the weapons industry have become standard. Yeah, to the point where, it is quite ridiculous, Ronni, where these journalists are sort of sitting there acting seriously and above them reads a banner saying Raytheon. It's incredible, actually. And I wonder if there's any other situation in the world with that kind of concentration of power that can kind of, bear down on a society like in Australia. It seems like such a unique place for that kind of thing.
Greg, have you got any thoughts about this?
I mean, we very much are a nation that, hell, we've got an Australian War Memorial that is sponsored by arms
Yes.
companies. So, when it comes to peak lunacy, I'm not even sure if the NPC takes the prize there. I'm actually not a member of the National Press Club. I'm a member of the Press Gallery, which is a completely different thing. And yeah, it is quite astonishing. And certainly the National Press Club's explanations were, it will be interesting to see what Chris has to say. Certainly his blog post suggests some screenshots of websites and everything suggests that the story was not quite as cut and dried as the National Press Club would like us to think it is.
Running the wool over Chris Hedges' eyes too, it's just like you're gonna end up in trouble.
But it's trying to. Sorry, Greg. Did I cut you?
No, go for it.
It's trying to pull the wool over the Australian public's eyes. I was absolutely fascinated by the amount of detail that the public statements from the National Press Club went into about the status of the booking and who had approached who and what was tentative and what was subject to confirmation, and that they're constantly reviewing their bookings and all sorts of extraneous palaver that had nothing to do with the facts of the issue. The matter is that Chris Hedges was invited to some degree. Whatever the status of the agreement was, and we won't go into the semantics of that, there was an initial agreement. That's the issue at hand. There was some form of initial agreement that the National Press Club decided not to proceed with. So the issue at hand is what happened and why to make them not continue with that booking. What happened to make them change their mind? That's what they owe the public an explanation on, not how they run their booking system and who put what where and all the other sort of extraneous matter that they went into. I was fascinated by it, and I think did I do something on Twitter this week about it, or I forget what social media platform I'm on, but I did a breakdown of the National Press Club's media statement and, pulled it apart basically and said that none of this has anything to do with anything. You haven't in any way explained why you chose not to proceed with the booking. That's what we want to know. What influences factored there?
It was obfuscation and lots of strange, irrelevant details. And of course, he has a wider tour and he's going to other places. Those places haven't cancelled him. clearly there's been some conversations and some things booked
Yeah.
into place. And because they've behaved this way, he gets to chat with sweary old me instead of the National Press Club. I think it'll probably be a better result for everyone watching, really. But
It's a highlight.
But isn't it incredible? Like we had Yanis Varoufakis banned from talks at the State Library of Victoria last year. We've had, Palestinian officials of the World Cup qualifying squad, barred entry into Australia. Like it does speak of, we've got Royal Children's Hospital doctors that, aren't allowed to have a Children of War conference. And we're asking, what is this pressure, right? And increasingly executives feel like they can keep us at an arm's length. And as Ronni said, blame all the kind of administrative issues and things like that as the main problem. But really, there's a common denominator here, and it is people that are critical of the Zionist regime, or people are critical that of what's going on in Palestine are getting silenced and bumped off schedules. It's removed from jobs at the ABC. So yeah, the list goes on.
It's also kind of odd that they continue to act, these organisations continue to act as though there will be no repercussion, that they will cancel this.
Yes.
And the journalist won't doesn't have a platform anywhere else to explain this and actually make an issue. There's a heck of a lot of Streisand effect going on here. And you just think surely the National Press Club should be aware of the media result of them cancelling his invite, especially when they put out a statement suggesting that they basically reviewed the topic, or it was a weird thing where they kind of reviewed it and then decided not to go forward and didn't explain what was it about their review that meant they wouldn't go forward. It was just an extraordinary statement to put out by a club representing media and journalists when the statement itself prompted so many questions that any decent journalist would be asking immediately.
That's right,
and it's almost as if one has to ask, they're aware of the fallout, of the subsequent fallout of it. It's almost as if you have to ask, pardon?
That's what I find sinister. I'm worried that they are aware and they don't care because they're feeling impunity.
They care, but that the alternative result, whatever that is worse for them.
Well, there's something to that, Ronni, because in the post-Francesca Albanese NPC environment, we have a different kind of format going on here where you can get someone like Albanese who can come on and really change the national dialogue in lieu of our government or media being able to do such a thing. So Chris Hedges has that ability to come into the NPC and open up a month's worth of national dialogue about the nature of who we are as a country. So yeah, potentially copping the flack and barging through all of this is worth it for them, especially for the power coming from above, sort of pressuring them.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
On a similar topic, let's talk about the NACC, but let's also talk about the Parliamentary Sports Club. Some news of this is broken at the end of the week. Do you want to take this one, Greg?
Yeah, well, it seems like David Pocock, just as before we started this panel, has put out that he's basically been kicked out of the Parliamentary Sports Club, which, look, I got to admit, I didn't realise actually existed. I have no idea what it is.
David Pocock has been kicked out of a sports club.
Which is quite astonishing, given he is easily the best sports person in the Parliament. Maybe
I think that's it, Greg. I think the others are sick of getting their butts kicked on the pitch by Pocock.
And the reasoning being that he is questioned, and this again goes to sponsorship. Sponsorship of now, is it a betting company or a betting company?
A betting company.
It's the lobby group for sports.
That's right. Yeah, it's not a betting company; it's a lobby group for the betting company. Which means that they are able to say, "Oh, look at us! We're sponsoring, some of the sort of charitable events that the Parliamentary Sports Club does." And Pocock said, "Really? We're doing this while we're also at the same time, especially the crossbenchers and are trying to enact anti-gambling legislation. He sort of pointed this out and apparently has been told, yeah, thanks, David. We no longer require your services in the gym or anywhere. And I see Allegra Spender, I think just before I came, I saw her put on Instagram sort of calling this out for the bullshit that it is. It's just extraordinary how we have these institutions folding in the weight of any sort of pushback on power. They will fold and do power's bidding. It's and I think this kind of is something that the press club, and as Joel was pointing out, that was it Sydney Library or Melbourne? I can't remember now. Melbourne Library was with Giannis Fairbucks, yeah. Who of course was out here sort of touring for the Australia Institute. It's institutions and the fragility of them in the face of, I guess, I would say nefarious organisations, or at least organisations who are perhaps not devoted to the public good. The fact that we can't rely on our institutions is something that is quite scary, especially when, and we'll get to this later, when we look overseas and how badly institutions in Europe and America have failed. It's just, and these are, David Pocock getting kicked off the Parliamentary Sports Club is small potatoes. But I always sort of say, don't sort of brag that you'll be able to put out the bushfire if you can't even put out a little, picnic fire. It just
point.
shows that we here in Australia should not ever be smug about what's going on in America or Europe and say, yeah, not in Australia. It's, if we have to rely on our media, on our institutions to stand up against these things, the evidence is pretty clear they won't.
I'm talking to some quite serious, quite concerned people about exactly these themes, Greg. You're right. So what if David got kicked out of the sporting team? But it is a microcosm of a corruption and a culture that is seeping through. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that Anthony Albanese is the president of this sports club that is being paid for by a lobbying group. And that has to be untenable, unviable in a society that values transparency.
Well, it was actually on this point, it's extraordinary in Parliament this week, just at the end of question time, I think it was on Wednesday, Anthony Albanese stood up and the question was actually about what is the government doing for clubs, RSL clubs and other clubs around the country. And it was all so he could talk about how they've frozen the excise on beer for a couple of years. And, sort of was... so notionally it was about, like seriously, I thought he was going to say, let's all get on the beers. But it was extraordinary how he was talking about the clubs and how these clubs are the lifeblood of communities and everything. I'm like, are you going to mention the pokies? No, it was all, oh no, they're doing great things. And even saying, oh, these are great places in societies with smaller families now where you can go and enjoy society of other people. Yeah, and the pokies. But, it was an extraordinary thing. And so I don't suspect he's too troubled by having gambling lobbyists helping fund a club that he's a president of.
You might be right there, Greg. Do you think he might be concerned about the blowback around the NACC, Ronni?
Oh, goodness me. My favourite little hobby horse, the National Anti-Corruption Commission. What particular blowback is that? Because there are a lot of different winds blowing at him.
Well,
on a lot of different fronts.
Is anything happening with the National Corruption Commission, Ronni? Have they caught any corruption?
Yes, they have. Well, what's happening is they have been practicing weaponised incompetence. But anything beyond that, I looked into the NACC just to refresh my memory, because it's my favourite little hobby horse, refresh my memory. And I think it is, the figures are a little bit approximate because I'm going from memory. But to date, the NACC was instituted on the 1st of July 2023. So it's well over 2 years now, heading into 2.5 years. They have received to date in excess of 6,000 referrals. Of those 6,000 referrals of corruption, they have investigated, proceeded with approximately to date about 45 of them. They have received, and I need to clarify this, they have had 11 convictions, 11 criminal convictions. 10 of those 11 convictions are the result of their predecessor, the previous Australian Law Enforcement Investigation Commission. So the NACC, in its own right, has successfully managed to assist in the prosecution of one individual. That is a conversion rate, a criminality conversion rate of 0.016%.
How many
They have,
hours? How many
however-
hours are we talking about here?
And
we
How many staff?
They have approximately 228 staff.
Yeah.
They have, now I'd like, maybe Greg would be able to get through this, because I worked this week with a former senior public servant to try and work out their budget, and I couldn't. And neither could the former public servant of 30 years experience. Their annual budget, including resources, is anywhere between 55 million to 114 million. And the resources, we couldn't get to the bottom of that. So be cautious of that. But the budgetary allocation is 55 million, and then it includes add-ons from MyEFO and all sorts of complicated data that I couldn't get to the bottom of, neither could my friend. So we have 228 staff. Of that budget, annual budget, let's be kind and say it's 55 million. It's not, it's well in excess of that, but let's be kind. Of that 55 million, in excess of 6.5 million of that is taken up with the salaries, the remuneration packages of the Commissioner and the 3 Deputy Commissioners. They undertook last year 134 speaking engagements around Australia and overseas.
Do we know whereabouts?
Well, I do know that last year they were in Wagga Wagga, and which is very exciting for Wagga. Mm-hmm. And they undertake a lot of what I call public education campaigns. You can drill into the data. Their annual reports are there. They are strangely worded, but their annual general reports are there. It is apparent that the organisation is a public education unit. They speak broadly on matters of deterrence and education on matters of public corruption. That is not what the Australian public wanted. That is not what the Australian public was promised from the Albanese government, but that is functionally what they do. They have staff in offices in Canberra, Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne and Perth. And that's what they've received is one dodgy airport worker in 2.5 years.
So 200 odd staff, hundreds of millions of dollars of funding, 2 years of time to settle into the role, one dodgy airport guy is the result of all of that. And let's also talk about what was happening when this was brought to the Australian people. The Australian people were quite furious at the blatant corruption happening during the Scott Morrison government. It was in front of us every single day. And this Prime Minister did campaign on a National Anti-Corruption Commission with teeth.
With teeth, yes.
With teeth. That was the quote. I can't see any teeth.
Can I give you a case study? I think this illustrates, it's actually hilarious, unfortunately, but I think it illustrates exactly what the National Anti-Corruption Commission is about. The NACC instigated about approximately 12 months ago something called Operation Kingscliff. Now, goodness me, Operation Kingscliff, it sounds like something out of a John le Carré novel. It's very exciting. It was deemed so important that the NACC produced a 32-page report on it after its completion. They also produced a video, which they uploaded to YouTube, which was narrated by the Commissioner himself. And they also produced a series of case study documents on Operation Kingscliff. Now, what was Operation Kingscliff, you may ask? Okay. Was it bribery of a federal politician, embezzlement, fraud, extortion? Are you thinking, was it a drug smuggling operation within border protection or an international money laundering ring? No, this enormous costly exercise, it was much more exciting than that. Are you ready for this? They caught
Aliens in the Antarctica?
Please.
No.
All right. Okay, all right, okay, sorry.
No. You're on the edge of your seat. They caught a middle manager, public servant, passing on interview questions to her sister's fiance.
Yeah, wow.
Wow.
Really?
Not all the interview questions either, mind you, just some of them. He had applied for a position. He was already a working public servant and he applied for a transfer into the Department of Home Affairs. And she supplied him with a few interview questions and helped ease his way into the job. Yes, that's it. That was their major exciting find of the year, where we needed a 32-page report, case studies and video productions to tell Australia how they caught a mid-level manager helping someone with their interview. Now, a contrast with that, the NACC had robo-debt put in front of them, actually handed to them on a platter. A public malfeasance that ensnared over 400,000 Australians in its net, and it continued for almost 4 years. The successful class action cost Australian taxpayers in excess of $1.2 billion. The Robo-Debt Royal Commission cost over $33.6 million and was examined and reported on by a former Chief Justice of the Queensland Supreme Court. It ran for almost 2 months and it ultimately produced almost 1,000 pages in its report. In fact, the report was so large that it had to be broken into 3 volumes. It included a sealed section that recommended investigation into 6 separate individuals of interest. Robo-debt remains one of the largest cases of maladministration in Australia's political history. Now, with Operation Kingscliff in mind, would you like to know what the NACC has so far publicly produced on robo-debt compared to Operation Kingscliff, the dodgy middle management? We received a 1.5-page media release. How's that for value for money?
Page and a half.
Page and a half. Don't tell me that Australians aren't getting value for money from the NACC.
I mean, I think we need to just sort of openly talk about what a sham this is at this point.
It's essentially, Australia has facades of democracy, but we don't necessarily practice democracy. So we have a structure, we have a shop front that the Albanese government set up. And they named it and they daubed it the National Anti-Corruption Commission. It doesn't practice anything of the kind. It's a shop front, but you can't get through the front door and you can't open it and you can't see inside and nothing appears to happen. So we have the facades, we have Potemkin politics, we have the facades of a democracy, but we don't actually practice it. So having studied the NACC over the last 2.5 years, I am serious when I say that it is a public education unit that masquerades as something that it isn't.
I mean, you could say the same thing for the entire government at this point.
Your latest article, Ronnie, goes into this a little bit. Like, you were speaking about also how social cohesion is kind of weaponized around this as well. And like, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how, all the facade of these democratic institutions like the NACC and the opacity of them, as you say, like the doors are sort of welded shut and we can't get in. It's rocking the foundations of this country as all these sort of things going on. So what are some ways that grassroots institutions and civil society can kind of get involved here to try and pry these doors open a little bit?
I'm not entirely sure I have the answers to that. I have lots of questions, but it's certainly organisations like the NACC, for want of a better term, organisations like that, I mean, they contribute greatly to the breakdown in public trust in our institutions, into the disintegration of social cohesion. It's critical for any anti-corruption body in its credibility and its public trust. For me, it has to do 4 things. It has to act transparently, it has to act with speed, it has to act decisively, and it has to act on issues of serious, in uppercase, corruption that affects Australians. Now, the NACC that Australians have has failed on all 4 counts. I mean, look at our freedom of information legislation, look at the number of public institutions that we have. I don't know what the answer is But I know that people should be becoming more involved in some aspects of civil disobedience and questioning what's going on. Largely, Australians remain reasonably politically disengaged.
And could
I
it
mean,
be
one of
like the
the-
times have changed too? Like we went into 2022 with the NACC, or the idea of the NACC being really high up in the polity, and situations have just decayed and changed so much in the time since that now in the orders of priorities, the NACC is down a little bit, in the periphery of the Australian voter.
Yeah, and one of the other problems with the NACC is, it's doing nothing, but it actually is doing something, and that's making all politicians who may be willing to undertake some corrupt action, and public servants as well, feel a hell of a lot safer. Because if you look around, shit, even the robo debt people got away with it. Well, I'm safe.
Yes. Yeah.
And it just makes everyone feel comfortable because they know, the name is there, the shop front's there, and that's all we have to worry about. We can dust our hands, and it actually gives greater cover for corruption because it actually everyone who's sort of in there kind of knows, this is just a wink kind of thing, and it has that broader sense, though, as you're right, Joel, of damaging trust in institutions. And trust in institutions is so fragile, and we don't spend enough time as a government or even as a polity of actually caring about institutions and people's trust in them, because you don't get them back very quickly. You think about the ABC and what they have done over the past year, what happened under with Antoinette Lattouf and other things. You lose that trust. It doesn't come back. It takes a long time to win it back. You have to earn it back rather than rely on the fact, we've been here forever and you can always rely on us.
Mm-hmm.
People will go with that until they can't rely on you, and then you're just like a startup. You've got to win it back, and
Exactly.
It's tough.
There are so many different options for alternatives to media right now. The only thing that we all really need to protect is our reputations, and we do that by being truthful and honest. That is the most important currency I think any journalist has, any of these institutions have, when we're talking about protecting from corruption. And why Australians are they seem disengaged with this stuff. Perhaps part of that is a failure on some of our part to educate the dangers of this sort of levels of corruption across society, because we are seeing a fascistic push across all of these Western democracies, and it's corruption like this that allows this stuff to start seeping in over the decades. And then you wake up, frog boiling water, and all of a sudden you're under tyranny.
Could I put into, sorry, just put something into, say, for the viewers, into sort of a simply understood term. We had revelations this week or last week in the Saturday paper that the lack of transparency and the hidden investigations and so on was as a result of the push from Anthony Albanese. He was the person who wanted everything behind closed doors, and I'd actually already been told that by somebody, a source within the Albanese government. Now, that's all very well and good, but could I just tell people who are watching this that at the moment in Australia, in the Australian judicial system, if you are brought in front of the courts on a summary offence, which is generally speaking, a minor matter, anything under, 2 years imprisonment, etc. That could be anything from public disorder, which is having a bit of maybe having a drunken fight in front of the pub, drink driving charge, minor shoplifting charges, theft, speeding, etc. Your name is listed on the court records for proceedings that day, regardless of whether you're found guilty or not. Your name in that court hearing is a matter of public record and remains a matter of public record, that you've been charged on that summary offence. Anybody in Australia can access those public records. Now, sometimes it's not. There are obviously exceptions to that rule in terms of suppression orders or, various in-camera proceedings and so on. But largely speaking, you could be shoving some milk down the front of your top in the supermarket, and you can be brought before a magistrate and your name is out there for the world to see. Why doesn't that apply in the National Anti-Corruption Commission with people in positions of privilege and power?
And I just wanted to say to via Ronnie to Greg again, like how these institutions are decaying and how this really affects public trust, because we need champions for these institutions. We don't have champions for these institutions in our modern society. It used to be potentially the Labor Party that used to care a little bit more about these institutions, that used to be jeweled in its kind of achievements when it harkened back to whatever it did back in the good old days. It brought up a lot more than Medicare, but now it's kind of been reduced to that little green card, and Albanese was flapping that around a little bit. But apart from that, these institutions haven't been championed, and with that comes this behavior, comes this culture and this decay that we're seeing within everything. And as Ronnie said about that opacity and people hiding behind the knowledge that institution is actually working in their favor, it creates like a complete decline in the social contract within a very short period of time. And we're starting to see in that post-COVID environment a country that we just couldn't recognize about 5 or 6 years ago as a consequence of it all, sort of the coalescence of it all together at once. So it's a interesting thing to see.
This is probably a good point to just talk briefly about what we saw down at WebDoc, because this touches on this as well in relation to the unions. A long time ago now, I was on the MUA picket lines down in the Peter Reef era, and I saw, growing up, I witnessed the solidarity in the organisation, and I understood that these organisations understood their own power, and they acted, and they used it for social justice issues. Going down at WebDoc this time, there were people from the union movement, but they were not representing their unions. They were people that held these principles, but needed to be there as individuals because their leaders weren't there blockading this dock with them. There are a couple of older hands that were teaching people how to picket, how to blockade, where to stand. And then during the day, as it kept unfolding and things got a little bit tense, we're in the middle of a 4-way highway at one point, they kept democratically voting about their decisions, even in the middle of a highway, whether they should split up and block the other end. It was quite an interesting display of community democracy, very much from the grassroots. And this stuff is emerging because, as we keep saying, there is impunity for people that exist in the establishment space right now.
Yeah.
And
people in power do what they want.
I think we should never forget that this is a purposeful thing, and the industrial action is a classic. Most workers have not been on strike or done industrial action because it's incredibly hard to actually do industrial action now legally. It has become a very much last resort, and you still have to go through the Fair Work Commission and apply for protected industrial action and things like this. So, and that's a purposeful changes to the industrial relations legislation. And we're seeing it more and more mirrored for all protest. You just know, as we had this week about trying to have pro-Palestinian marches and rallies. And we know the reason why these things are being reduced is because they're effective. I mean, we had tens of, I can't remember now. It's many tens of thousands. I was actually on holiday, so I missed it, marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge in protest and in support of Palestine. And there is no way you can tell me that the government didn't view that and realise they actually, if they were to recognise Palestine, they're not going to be way out on the fringes, that there clearly is massive broad-based public support. So, there will be, I'm not saying one directly led to the other, but it demonstrated that, hey, this isn't just loony uni students and ex-hippies. It's actually
it's a
parents,
majority
and
of
kids, and
society.
it's Australians. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's the thing, though, that Australians have had to drag everyone in the
Yeah.
elite kicking and screaming to this point here. And even the bloody unions. I mean, the ACTU, which has been parlaying with the Labor Party to be a partner and a stakeholder in decision making more so than an adversary that they have to work with to sort of come to some kind of compromise. In that post, like the post-accord neoliberal Australia, the unions have fused essentially with the Labor Party. And I often wonder how the unions would have been acting. I mean, and that's another institution that's not working the way it's meant to. So, we're looking for these kind of checks and balance, handbrakes in society that for the people are, and things like the unions aren't coming to the party. And it's because they have been like defanged over the last, 4 or 5 decades. And if they're not neglected, they're defanged. And, union members now are sort of putting their hands out for slop, hoping to sort of parlay for a pay rise more so than, harken back to the spirit of what unionism's all about in this country, going back to the apartheid in South Africa and back to the pig iron protests, in the 20s, right?
Yeah.
And we should say that the MUA in particular has been, I suppose, more vocal than some of the other unions on this topic. But you're right, it is they've all been captured by a neoliberal mindset where they're kind of looking out for themselves and not the greater swathe of humanity, which, is starkly contrasted with what we've seen in Italy. We saw general strikes 3 days out of 12, dragging the country to a standstill, millions of people exercising direct action to grind the country to a halt. And the other thing that happened down there, Joel, was I was speaking to some activists that have been blockading the dock over and over again. And it costs the government direct money. It costs them millions of dollars for every hour that it's shut. And it does do something to stop these parts getting to Israel. We've been conditioned to march in state-sanctioned blocks at state-sanctioned times and then go home and then feel like we've done the job. And I'm not sure that's the job. I think the Italians might have a clearer idea of how power works.
Well, John Howard's work choices was a result of that parlaying, and essentially those thin, narrow lines that the Australian worker has to walk through to get a bloody fair suck of the sauce bottle are so narrow. And, you do see now at these protests, you do see unofficial groups, unions for Palestine that are at these protests, often against the will and the wishes of their own union. And they're up front and center organizing at some of these places. Like there was a union there that day we were there that, essentially you would see as a very moderate kind of union. But because it's such a large union, there's a lot of people that, have a lot of support for Palestine and have a lot of issues with Australia's support for Israel. And we see those numbers in the polling. We see them nationwide. I mean, even in the US, I saw a figure now, I think it's 51% for Palestine. The first time in recorded history in the US that the majority of the US population supports Palestine more than it does Israel. And that's a pretty interesting thing.
When you look at Palestine too, the Palestinian issue in an Australian context, it's fascinating to see how successful the manipulation of the narrative has been. So I went and dove into some media monitoring statistics, and I think it was something like 2/3 of the media monitoring that I came across in the Murdochracy, which is vast and huge, was in relation to protests and public unrest in relation to Palestine. That's in terms of news footage, printed footage, radio interviews, etc. So you talking there about how you were blockading the docks in Melbourne, Web Dock in Melbourne. We're talking about people protesting. Greg was talking before about the protests over the Sydney Harbour Bridge. That's what grabs the news cycle and grabs the public imagination. So the Palestinian people, Palestine as a state, yes, it is a state, Executive Council of Australian Jewry, but anyway, Palestine is a state, and the Palestinian people are never presented as a peace-loving people. We never see any alternative to the Palestinian issue other than the fact that it provokes outrage and discourse. And part of, I believe, the Zionist agenda is to deliberately create problems and public outrage and discourse, whether that be through the ABC, whether that be through writing to the Bendigo Writers Festival, etc., etc., etc. So that what that plants subliminally in the Australian psyche is the fact that Palestine is it's a bit of a problem. It's causing disruption in society. It's interrupting. We can't get our car over the bridge. Well, you couldn't get your car over the bridge when they closed it for a movie either. But, we can't get our car over the bridge. We can't get to work. We can't get to the supermarket. The docks are closed and I won't be able to get my hair that I ordered on eBay. So what we have is this framing of Palestine as being a problem for Australian society. And it's been very successful so far. That causes people to immediately react and say that this is breaking down our social barriers, our social trust, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's a really, really interesting agenda that the Zionist lobby's been pushing.
And I think it suits the natural temperament, the cultivated natural temperament of Australians, the shut the fuck up and let's have a barbecue vibes, because
stop causing trouble.
Yeah, because you're having people standing up for, I do think it's fair to say, standing up for humanity's right to exist without oppression and genocide. And the response is, I would like to go shopping at Maya, specifically in the city, specifically on Sunday, specifically at 12 o'clock. And God, you rabble are annoying. The detachment, I mean, it's sociopathic to a degree.
Yeah, well, look at the media analysis. If, say, for example, we put the Israeli flag up after October 7th, we put superimpose the Israeli flag on the Sydney Opera House. Now, regardless of the rights and wrongs of that was a peculiar thing to do, I felt. it was you could look at it as a statement of solidarity, but I wasn't aware that it had ever been done before. So using the Sydney Opera House to superimpose another country's flag on it was an interesting decision to make. Now, there was far more media attention and media analysis by 1,000% that was paid to the people who protested at the Sydney Opera House about that, to the crowds that gathered, to the people that voiced their dissent, than there was in any analysis as to why the flag was put on the Sydney Opera House in the first place. And if you go into the donors to the Sydney Opera House Trust and see the organisations and philanthropic trusts and individuals, including our anti-Semitism envoy, who donate vast sums of money to the Sydney Opera House, you'll start to see why the Premier of New South Wales decided to use the Sydney Opera House. But there is zero mention of that in the media. The whole focus was on the public outrage and the upset and oh, look at these naughty people. They're getting very upset about this and they shouldn't be doing that. Our lens is skewed on this.
Extremely skewed. And this is a great example, Ronni, of when people in the streets chant something very vague and generic, like capitalism causes these types of genocide. The intricacies of what you've just described is basically an example of what that means. That when you allow a cohort of people to become extremely wealthy, they become extremely influential, and the rest of us kind of need to suffer at their whims, especially if they're granted impunity.
Yes, yeah, I've always believed that Elon Musk is God's way of telling us that you can always have too much money.
It's compounded a lot too. People's by the third most concentrated media in the world behind China and Egypt, and just like any narrative that's been sort of whittled down and crushed, and any national discussion that's been nipped in the bud by design, the Gaza issues also fall into the same thing, and that same kind of national apathy that pervades our society it gets applied to this as well, and it's a sad thing that we don't have any inspirational leaders, that we don't have public figures that can stand up and kind of dream about something inspirational for the nation. And, in lieu of any good national discussions, we kind of languish at Maya, as they've said, and, sort of poke around the joint a little bit, hoping for something better. But, it doesn't help, I think.
And what is going to happen with the points that you've just two made projecting forward, people that this fight isn't going to stop. People are going to continue. You can't unlearn and unsee what you've seen about the Israeli occupation and what that really represents. And so mainstream Australia is being sold that there is a ceasefire and there is peace. People that understand this issue understand that it's not over until Palestine is free and the occupation needs to end. But because they're going to continue to protest, continue to make social cohesion decisions, I hate that phrase, they will be presented as anti-peace, as anti-social, and it's going to seem convincing to lots of people, I feel.
And Greg, I think this like reeks to the centrism in the country, which you write about a fair bit, because yeah, like this is the thing that stifles everything in this country, is this like blob of centrism that drowns out our human heart to what we see in Gaza here.
Yeah, and I don't want to get too down. We can get down on centrism, but one of the, I think, heartening things is that yes, the majority, and it's always going to be the case, the majority are not out protesting, but we have seen some real, I think, birth of activism from people. I certainly know people who really have never turned up to anything, who turned up to protest when they were around the country back in, what was it, August, September, those national days of protest, who were just there because despite what the media has been doing, because of, wonderfully in this instance, because of social media, people are able to see what's happening. And, it is the case, I think, if Israel had not actually committed genocide and had done what it has been doing, since 1948, of just sort of occupying and subjugating, there wouldn't have been this. But they actually did overplay their hand. They thought they could get away with it, and I don't think they have. Obviously, no one's going to jail, unfortunately, for them. There won't be any war crimes things, but Netanyahu didn't want to actually have to do a peace deal. It's just the fact that even despite all of the media coverage and the power of those lobby groups, the facts got through, and the facts were so horrendous that it outraged people who generally don't want to be outraged about things and would prefer to just, go shopping. So I think we need to sort of realize that there are moments that we can sort of build on, and that we don't sort of give in to apathy ourselves as progressives, and realize that the fight must go on. And you're right, like the protests or the sort of rallies that will be on today, there will be that coverage of why are they protesting still? Isn't it all solved and everything? And that's always an education thing. But it's something that hopefully there are, there are some green shoots here that can actually fire up some real sort of drive, and not just be, because we know media no longer has the influence it does have. So yeah, the Murdoch papers are terrible, and they will always try to, I guess, try to convince us that the truth is not so. But we have the tools to be able to counter that. And I think what we've shown is that we actually can use them quite well. And, it's just astonishing to me how much support there actually was for Palestine, both here in Australia and around the world. And this is something that, I never would have thought we'd have people marching across Sydney Harbour Bridge in support of Palestine. Really? That's ever going to happen? And it was almost it was not even a shock by the time it happened. When you saw the numbers, it was like, yeah, of course there's that much support. So it's easy to get depressed, but because the world's on fire and everything's horrible. But hopefully we can use this as a moment to keep realizing that we're not without power.
Thanks, Greg. I really appreciate that. Having reported on this for 2 years, it's very valuable to hear. In fact, we should probably wrap up on that note. Let's go to, do you guys have top tips, something that you want to highlight for the rest of the week? Joel.
Okay. Dan Duggan. bloke's going through his last process. Essentially, his 11th hour to try and stay his extradition to the United States. The fella has 6 kids, 6, like 3 little kids under 12, I think. And, you know, he's an Australian. He's renounced his US citizenship, and he, deserves, and he hasn't broken any laws either. How about that? The Attorney General could actually push tomorrow, could just write a piece of paper and release this man. So if you can, send a letter, put some pressure on the Attorney General or your local member for Dan Duggan.
Greg, anything?
Look, I don't have anything near as good as that by Joel. I was just a topic that I have seen some really good stuff around, and it's something that I want to really get into people's heads. It's the issue of AI, and there's certainly been a lot about copyright and everything. But and speaking with my economics hat on, I'm seeing finally some really good stuff coming out talking about the fact that this is a huge freaking bubble that unfortunately is probably going to be bigger than the GFC if it really bursts, because there is all this money being invested in AI for which there's no demand and no ability to actually produce, because the amount of energy that is required to produce all of these data, what are they called, data farms or data centers, is well beyond the actual supply of energy. And everyone's kind of just pretending that this isn't a thing. And it's something that I want people to realize, that when you're hearing talk about AI and all the investment and how it's going to be great for productivity and all that, also note that actually not only is it horrendous for the environment, it also is perhaps the biggest grift in the history of big grifts.
Well said. There are data centers being built the size of Manhattan in impoverished areas of the United States. So that's
for a random number generator.
And the investor documents will talk about, we just need about 19 nuclear power stations to help power all of this one data center, and everyone's like, we'll just build some. And it's like, really?
Just so we can get a little bit of drafting help with our emails and create pictures of hamburgers fighting ducks or whatever. Seems like a good thing to do. Ronnie,
I thought it was the controllers from the bunkers, but anyway, cool.
There's that too. In fact, Grace Tame and I had a bit of a chat about this as well. Check that out on the channel as well. Ronnie, top tips.
Oh, goodness, there's too many of them to count. That was really interesting, too, about both AI and the environmental impacts of it as well as every other aspect of it. As usual, the law lags behind that sort of progress, and also the fact that Dan Duggan, I would remind people, Dan Duggan is an Australian citizen. He is an Australian citizen that is being extradited to a foreign nation at the behest of a foreign nation, and that should alarm you incredibly. And for all the boomers out there, maintain the rage.
Absolutely.
I think it was here. Look, correct me
We're
if I'm
paying
wrong.
for the legal fees as well, Ronnie. We're paying for their legal fees.
The 50th anniversary of the 11th of November,
Thank
1975.
you. Is that what it's from?
So,
Thanks, Greg.
So
I thought Goff said it.
Yeah. Unfortunately, in 1975, they maintained their rage for about a day and then voted for Fraser, but we can still keep the fire burning.
Nothing much from me other than get to a protest today, because Palestine is still not free. Thank you for joining us. It's been a wonderful discussion. We'll see you next week. Cheers.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.